which is also known as the P5010. So this is what I was talking about with the nomenclature. You'll see at the bottom P5010 Tech 2 versus P5010 Tech 1 Chapter 2, two different things. So this is sanitation of living spaces. In this chapter, we're gonna go over the requirements for your housing facilities, lodging, the Brigs, the barbershops, beauty shops, child development centers, and fitness centers, all in this portion. Which it's quite a bit for just this little tiny book, right? But the good thing about this is one of the questions that I know will probably come up from here is, where do you find the references for this chapter? And that's gonna be in Appendix A. And I'll show you what that looks like in a little bit. Because anything that you don't find in this small text here, there's always a reference in the back that you can go to that you'll find some additional information. Because a lot of times when we're doing these inspections, you'll come across managers that are like, they're gonna question what you know. And so then that's when, if it says, hey, ensure that cleaning and disinfecting is complete with an EPA approved product, they're gonna know, well, why does it have to be an EPA approved product? Then you go back here to your references and it'll tell you the unified code facilities and all of the DOD instructions and OPNAV instructions, and anything that's like a publication or a reference or anything, all of that information will be back here in one of these references.
Okay. One more time on the instruction or document that we're going over right here, highlighted one.
Yeah, this is this book.
Okay.
Yeah, this is my inspection book. So that was the introduction. Alright. So for the housing facilities, for majority of the bases you'll go to, or a Navy base anyway, for the most part, the Marine Corps installations, they are going to be utilizing this instruction. The Army has their own instruction, but we just go with whatever the Department of Defense reference is, and then we go from there. In each of these types of environments, you can always go with the chapter or reference or whatever that is more strict, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So like here, for example, we are constantly battling between whether this is a Navy or Army base, but we're supposed to be joint operations. And then so sometimes they're like, well, this is an Army facility, so you can't use a Navy instruction on us. But there's an Army equivalent because they also have their own preventive medicine manual. So you can always, so like if you're on a Navy base and you don't, for whatever reason, have a Navy instruction, you can use an Army reference to use for that Navy base.
Okay.
Okay.
How much do the instructions like differ?
They pretty much say the same thing, except that we find that the Army references, they're more so in-depth than ours.
Okay.
Just because they like to spell things out like and break it down Barney style with everything. And then the Navy is like, hey, well, I expect that you have some type of common sense, so I'm just gonna tell you whatever you need to know, and that's it. I'm not giving you any additional information. But that's where all of these references come in. So the Army's preventive medicine manual, they won't really have a whole list of references. They'll have a few, but it's gonna be less than what's here, because all of that information is gonna be already in the book. So
Okay.
their manual's like thick. Okay, so pretty much you don't really have to do your homework or your research. They do it for you and just put it all in there. Okay, so again, this chapter makes sure that you are, in your facilities, you're maintaining the minimum standard for public health for the military. So moving into responsibilities, these are always gonna be the type of questions that you see is who's in charge of what and where and why. So the commander of naval installations, they're in charge of the housing and lodging programs, and so that is gonna cover your Fisher houses, that's going to cover your unaccompanied housing and things of that sort. And some hotels too, it depends on what it is. The director of the Marine Corps and non-appropriated from businesses, yeah, so the director of the Marine Corps and then Chief of Naval Operations, or Commander of Naval Installations, I'm sorry, they will be in charge of like your housing, lodging facilities. And then you have naval facilities, and they'll do the design and construction of the housing and the lodging areas. Public Works is responsible for the maintenance of the facilities and the major repairs. Sometimes you'll go back and forth with like whether Public Works is in charge or NAVFAC is in charge, but you can always just ask the manager or whoever's in charge of the building and they'll always know. Okay. And then preventive medicine, we do the inspections of everything. So the housing facilities, the dining facilities, the pools, the gym, the CDC, everything. We do all of those inspections. And they're documented on different forms. And then, once we document them on our form, whatever the form is, we upload it into a system. And I know for a fact this question is going to be on the exam because it's always on every single one, is the facilities. The inspection of the facility should be documented using the environmental health module, which is the Defense Occupational Health Readiness System, or DOORS. And this says DOORS IH, but don't let that confuse you because IH and EH in most preventive medicine units, they're always together. So like here, I work in environmental health, but industrial hygiene is also in our office. Because our jobs kind of overlap.
Could you use that up for a moment? Thank you.
And thank you for that. Let me know if I'm moving too fast or you want me to explain something again.
So who does the child and youth centers then?
The inspections, we do.
But they just don't get uploaded into the Defense Occupational Environmental Health Readiness System?
Yes, they do, but it says everything goes into the EH module.
Oh, okay.
Except for those.
Except for,
those
okay,
ones
yeah, okay.
would, yeah.
I see.
Oh, those would be classified as IH?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Interesting.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'm like,
I'm gonna double check that because I'm like, that's
Because,
interesting. So far for doors here, except child use. Yeah, no,
yeah,
you're right. You got that right.
yeah.
We don't put in the child development ones in there or the CDC inspections. By the end of this class, we can go look into it and I'll see because that's interesting.
Yeah, I'm like, why would you not want to put those in the same? If it's all being ran by the same,
Right.
why wouldn't it go in the same place?
Yeah, because we put all of our habitability inspections we put in there, but these ones, and maybe what it possibly could be is because the CDCs, they have the kitchen portion of it too, so that's why it wouldn't separate it out. But the food inspections, we put those in, and then the habitability has its own separate module. But the habitability is not combined with the kitchen, which it is for the.
It is. Oh, okay.
CDC.
That's probably what it is
Yeah.
then.
And then also they're trying to figure out how to make doors work in way that is actually useful, because it's kind of like garbage, like most of those things that we have.
You don't say.
Yeah. Alright. Chapter 2, for whatever reason, I don't have that one with the highlighted portions. But if you wanna see it, we can go to that real quick, so just so that you can follow along with what I'm saying here.
Chapter 2, sanitation of living spaces.
Yeah, this is the same thing, except this one doesn't have the highlights in it like the other one did. Because for whatever reason, chapter 2 didn't come up. So we just left off here about the doors IH stuff. And now we're gonna move into section 2 is for the housing and lodging facilities. And then we can just jump into the responsibilities. So, if it'll work with me, okay. Alright. So again, the preventive medicine department, that's what PMD stands for. We will do the habitability and sanitation inspections for all of these facilities. So that goes for the Navy family housing, the barracks, the Navy housing leasing program, and the Navy Gateway Inns and Suites, the Navy Lodge, Fisher, all of it, we're doing inspections for. So like this chapter does not apply to medical inpatient facilities, because obviously the hospitals will have something going on with that. Structures used for field housing of units deployed for combat training, which is weird because depending on where you are or where you go, if they do set up housing units, they are gonna expect you to do some type of surveillance of whatever area you're staying in. But we just won't enforce this instruction. But we will get some guidance from this instruction, obviously, for how we do that. Temporary lodging facilities that are not listed on the installations, plant, and property account. We don't even need to get into any of that. Okay, and so the preventive medicine department is also responsible, like we was talking about before, using whether it's the DOORS IH or EH module to document our habitability inspections. And then we provide the recommendations to the CO of what needs to happen as far as any health or sanitation concerns go. So really, our job is not to police the facilities, it is to identify a breakdown in systems of control and figure out how we can make things better. This is jumping far.
And you're responsible for using the DOORS EH or IH to do what with the facilities? Is it just like keep them standard? Like that one sentence that we're going over?
Oh, so we, wait, say again?
Oh, I was just wondering, like, with DOORS EH and IH, like, what do you guys use that for?
To input our inspections. So once we're done, we put it into this, it's another government system
Right.
that we use to put it in for tracking purposes.
Okay.
Is a report generated every so often that you can go to the CO?
No, so when we actually do our inspections, we write up the memos and go send it off to the CO. So they will have like the inspection reports at the end of the month, as well as an executive summary and all that stuff that goes in there, so they can see what's going on. And we do that monthly.
Got it.
And a lot of this chapter too repeats itself, cause like again, we talked about public works, they're in charge of the major repairs versus NAVFAC, they might be in charge of other little things or different pieces of equipment that might go in there. And like the water system, public works will work with NAVFAC and make sure that everything is in standards for potable water and stuff like that. Alright, so here's some definitions, which I don't think we should need to go over. Something that I've seen a lot is it'll ask you like what's the difference between a disinfectant or like if something is sterile and things of that nature. Okay, and we got to your question here, what the doors modules for is protecting personnel and support of military operations through the identification, evaluation, and control of occupational and EH stressors. And then, again, down here, it provides information that's needed by, that's occupational health and environmental health staff, the command surgeons for reporting options to the commanders regarding the reduction of health threats.
Gotcha.
So we recommend based on what we see. We make observations, we maintain a surveillance program, and we make recommendations on how to mitigate health threats. Some more definitions, and I guess the reason that they put these in here is because depending on the type of facility that you go to, there's gonna be certain requirements that you have to do for your inspections that may not necessarily apply to others. So like, even though it's all gonna be documented pretty much on the same form, there's just certain things that they're looking for as far as like the barracks room versus the Fisher houses. It all goes on the same form, but the frequency of those inspections are gonna be different for barracks versus Fisher houses. Like our Fisher houses are on an annual basis right now versus our barracks, and that's quarterly.
Mm-hmm.
But you can, that can vary depending on what's going on in the building. A lot of this stuff, so we talk about service dogs and things like that. For certain facilities, they will allow service dogs, and then there's other places where it won't be allowed. For example, like in the barracks, I'm sure you cannot have a service dog in there. But the Fisher houses, they can bring in their service dogs.
They can have it the Wounded Warrior, right?
Mhm. So, and then the difference between the barracks and the temporary lodging is the barracks is by unaccompanied personnel. So just like any of us service members without kids, versus a temporary lodging facility is utilized for people that are coming TAD to the command, and they're only here for a certain amount of time. But again, the way that we conduct those inspections is all gonna be the same. And now we can get into the inspection portion, right? This is still section 2. Okay, so for our inspections, we don't inform the manager that we're gonna come. We just show up and do our thing. And so then that way it'll give us a clear picture of what actually goes on a normal basis. So if you give them notification,
They try
ahead
to
of time.
fix things.
Exactly. So it's like we don't want to see what things should technically be like. We want to see what you actually do every day. Yes.
So when y'all were inspecting barracks, what type of stuff like are you looking for?
So for ours, we look for, so you know how like the chain of command will come out and they will do room inspections to check for cleanliness?
Yeah.
We're not looking for that. We are looking, cleanliness to a certain extent, right? So we're gonna be looking at your showers to see if there's any type of mold or mold-like substances growing. We're gonna look into the ventilation, and that's when we work with industrial hygiene because they actually have meters to tell if the ventilation in the room is proper. Make sure that everything is functioning the way that it's supposed to, like your toilet is not broken or the sealant around your toilet is not all messed up, things like that. The windows to check to see if they have the caulking where it's supposed to be, or is it caulking on the toilet and then the sealant on the windows? Where, yeah, pretty much, yeah. To check to see if all of those things are in place. We also look at lighting in the room, and we have like a little machine that'll tell us like the lighting and stuff like that. So that's different from the barracks inspection that the chain of command goes through if they do like a health and comfort. They wanna make sure that you're cleaning your room. We don't care about that. We just wanna make sure that where you are, it is habitable. Like these, like the conditions that is in this room, you can stay there and be safe, pretty much. So, but, I mean, and it's weird too, cause they kind of overlap with what the barracks managers do versus what we do. Ours, it actually goes more extensive to say the conditions of the building as a whole, because it does talk about cleaning. Now, you can have an inspection done by your chain of command, and then they recommend that environmental health comes out as far as the cleaning portions go, because for example, right here, right, it says every facility, it has to be cleaned on a daily basis, or whatever you have to do, or how often you have to clean it, that just depends on who's there, right? And so it's saying the trash has to be removed every day, or it just has to be removed, all trash. Can anybody guess why that would be? Yeah, so for like attracting pests and things like that, that's what we will be looking at. So you have to remove the trash. And then, so certain things will overlap, and then with that, it didn't mention anything about like, kitchenettes and surfaces like that, that needs to be cleaned too, cause like the microwave, we will go check inside your microwave and make sure that all of that is clean. Because the microwave and the refrigerator too, cause all of the like crusted food that will be left in the microwave, all of that attracts pests. And then, so if you don't clean that, then obviously we're gonna have an issue, and then it's gonna spread throughout the entire building. So just wanna make sure we look at that. And then checking the refrigerator as well too, because that's where you're gonna store all of your food, right? And so obviously they're gonna come and be attracted to those areas. So then in the refrigerator, we're gonna look at the gaskets on the inside to make sure that there's no food crusted in there and those types of surfaces. Also, we're gonna be looking to see if they are sealed the way they're supposed to be, and it's not like an accordion thing going on where you can just pull it off and the whole thing is hanging off, because then that would mean that the refrigerator is not getting the actual seal to close the way that it's supposed to.
Maintain
So
the temperature
then,
inside.
exactly, then it won't maintain the temperatures of the food, and then you potentially get yourself sick depending on what's in there
Yeah.
that you're eating, right? Then for the floors, we're gonna check the carpet to make sure that there's no type of trip hazards or anything, any type of safety concerns. We're gonna be looking into that. For those types of facilities, we also look at common areas, because just because you live a certain kind of way doesn't mean that everybody else lives that way. So we want to make sure that the common spaces are kept clean as well. We also check the water, we test the water, the temperature. I don't know if everybody knows the issue that was going on with building 60 with their water, and that's been going on for years and no one's done anything about
Hot
it.
water.
Yeah.
So what made him, move everybody out now?
For all of the, pretty much to catch up on all of the issues that have been pointed out for a while now that hasn't been addressed, they're trying to get up to speed with all of those facility work orders to fix that before they start putting people back in. And so potentially soon it should be opening back up, but we don't have any word yet. So we're just waiting.
What's exciting?
With these exams, the Navy likes numbers, so the hot water temperature for the barracks.
No greater than 120 degrees.
It should be no higher than that.
I believe that's the same for shipboard also, isn't it? Yeah. So that's always been a question also on the exam is what temperature is for the showers on the ship as well, or water temperatures for a ship as well as on it. So I've seen that written several different ways on the exam. So 120 degrees is just the standard period.
And on the opposite end of the spectrum, is there a
Like a too cold.
yeah?
We'll cross that.
Not that I've seen it.
Where? Just curious.
Because it just gives you the max, which is 120, because you don't want to, it says to prevent scalding.
Yeah, I don't think there's a.
Yeah, there's really no minimum requirement, but I mean, obviously, you're not gonna have people showering in cold water in the winter.
Right.
Absolutely not. Probably they do.
So moving here, this talks about refuse again, which is what we were talking about, like the trash and stuff like that. You wanna make sure that is removed. And saying bulk waste is collected at a minimum of once every 3 months. I'm not exactly sure of what that would be talking about, because the frequency of that is gonna be actually a lot more than once every 3 months, so. Pest control. We also check for any type of evidence or indication of infestations. So part of what we're gonna look at too when we go to those barracks rooms is your mattress. We're gonna check the lining of your mattress to make sure that there's not any evidence of bed bugs or any like sacks of like their little shells or whatever. And then check the baseboards of the carpet and all of the furniture in the room to make sure that you don't have any in there. Here's a big one too for the minimum size of the room. It's gonna be the 72 square feet per person. Including a minimum of 3 feet between the sleeping arrangements. Between the racks and the bunk beds. These are for like the regular, like the installations, because obviously on a ship it's gonna be less than that 72
Right.
square feet.
You maybe get 600 people on a 72 square
Yeah.
feet. There's 3 highs. Ain't no joke.
No.
Let me tell you, that bottom rack is not as great as people think. people stepping on your stuff.
We had that in field med.
Oh yeah, no, that's not even close.
And field med, we had the 3 rack and right across the way you have like
Right,
the
so with
wall locker. Yeah.
The Fisher houses, the CO is in charge of those, and so you would have like family come if there's anyone that's during a hospital stay, they'll come stay in those spaces, and so they have a facility staff or like a environmental services staff to where they can clean up, but those guests or those residents, they are actually responsible for cleaning up their own spaces. And then so they can actually, the Fisher houses will be the ones that we can notify upon request, because the residents there, they can actually request an inspection be done of their spaces ahead of time. For the Fisher houses, we inspect 10% of the total number of housing units on an annual basis. And again, depending on the request, whether it's the CO or the resident, we can like make that more frequently or increase the number of inspections that we're doing. So you can always increase the number of inspections. We're never gonna decrease what the minimum requirements are, because everything in these regulations, it gives you a minimum requirement. So you have to at least hit that minimum. And it talks again about pest control and the housing, cause it's a joint service, so the housing, management, they're gonna get, quarterly inspections done for the pest control. But depending on the situation, it will definitely be greater for certain conditions and locations. And also if they're bringing in cats and dogs and things of that nature, because they can bring them in, pest control is probably gonna be a lot more frequently than just quarterly. We're gonna talk about the unaccompanied housing, so that's just for us regular service members, and for those who do not have kids. Wanna make sure that they are sleeping head to toe for the arrangement, so that we can minimize the risk of respiratory diseases.
Oh, okay.
Yep. Okay. And then, so as far as cleaning those within the facility, they are always gonna use the EPA approved disinfectants, which you'll see around all the time in there. In certain facilities, you'll see like the little spray bottles that they use. It normally has like Ecolab stuff in there, or whatever the regulation states that is approved. So they can't just go to the store and buy whatever they want to clean. They have to actually use certain products. And again, for the barracks inspections for us, it's gonna be a pop-up. We're not gonna let the managers know that we're coming for the barracks. Fisher houses, we can. Barracks, we're not going to. And for our inspection frequency for that, we're gonna do 5% of the total rooms. And that is, speaking of, we have this conversation back and forth all the time, cause it just says 5% of the total rooms, so we're like, does that include common spaces, does this include office spaces? And we haven't been able to come up with a solution to that, so we just say, no, 5% is only gonna pertain to the rooms that people actually live in. Where there's a bed, 5% of those rooms is what we're gonna inspect. And then everything else is gonna be in addition to that 5%. But honestly, I think that just depends on whoever is in charge. Because again, we said that we're always gonna hit that minimum, which is the 5%. So we going above and beyond that.
Can the CL be like, so the instruction says 5%, can they be like, I want 10 to 15% inspected, cause you know, they can always make it more strict.
Yep.
So it's, that's just like a recommendation of the 5%,
Yes.
but can always be changed depending on the CL's discretion.
Yep. And we actually have a lot of that going on here too. There's a lot of internal policies and SOPs that we have for, like, for example, with our water and ice samples, we go and test the heterotrophic plate counts. And the reference says that we can put it, the standard at 500, like, colonies per unit, right? But then the hospital goes and says, hey, anything above 270, I wanna know about it. And so, things like that.
Interesting.
And then this, honestly, this just talks about the same things over and over again for each facility of what we're gonna inspect. So the service of the buildings, we're gonna be looking at whether it's clean, if it's sanitary, if it's free from conditions that's going to harbor pests, and that's pretty much it for this. Okay. Yeah, that's it for that section. So now we can move into confinement facilities. And these are the ones that we was talking about. This is the one that I got from Blue Jacketeer. So if anybody wants this information, I can, if you don't have Blue Jacketeer, if you just wanna see what it looks like, I can send it to you via email, because these chapters are it's not that long, but it's quite a bit to print out. Plus, I didn't know how many people were gonna be in here, so. Okay, so as far as the confinement facility goes, the facilities engineer is gonna be in charge of making sure that the construction is the way that it's supposed to be. Public Works, they're gonna do the major repairs for the confinement services. The operator is responsible to make sure that the operations of the confinement ashore is in standard with whatever the local instruction is gonna be, and that's gonna be provided by the base, or even this publication we can use for that as well. Okay, and then again, some more definitions. It tells you what the brig is, what confinement is, detainee, and I have not seen any of this stuff historically on these type of exams. Typically from here, they're gonna wanna know who's responsible for things, so they're gonna wanna know, like, Public Works is in charge for the major repairs. They're gonna wanna know the size of the barracks room usually. You wanna know cleanliness is done daily. The inspections are unannounced unless it's for like Fisher houses. They can be notified ahead of time. We don't get things like this. Also for the Briggs, the inspection frequency is quarterly. And again, same thing with the Brig, just like our barracks, you wanna make sure that it's clean and is in well kept sanitary conditions to promote or free from conditions that will promote pest proliferation or harborage. Okay, let's go into something else, because all of those facilities, they are going to be pretty much the same with a lot of what it's talking about. There goes the hot water again for the 120 degrees for the Brig. This reference repeats itself a lot.
And it's a requirement for 72 square feet for the living space.
Yep. For the next section is the barbershop. That's gonna be section 4. It talks about the laundry and the face cloths. You want to make sure the towels and things like of that sort, they are washed once a week. And the blankets are washed as necessary, so it can be monthly at a minimum, depending on who you have. For the barbershop and beauty shops, you're gonna make sure that whoever's in charge and the contract employees, that they go through a medical evaluation to make sure that they don't have any type of skin infections that can potentially be spread to whoever their patrons are gonna be. And this is why, because we want to make sure that there's no type of bloodborne viruses or instruments that's going to be invasive to the skin or the hair or the removals. So if you have a person that's cutting your hair and they have this open blistering wound on themselves, they need to have an evaluation before they're in there and make sure that it's covered up for 1 or 2, depending on what it is. They probably won't even be cutting hair until whatever that is heals on their skin, to prevent the spread of any type of bloodborne pathogens. So the barber and beauty shop services, for most spaces, they are regulated by NEXCOM and the Marine Corps for the exchange. Pretty funny story about that. When I went to the June, I went to Jordan in 2019, and I was one of 2 PMTs in charge of 1,300 sailors and Marines. And as soon as we got down there, they wanted to have the barbershop open. So I had to do the pre-operational inspection of the barbershop and make sure that they had all the equipment that they needed to use, and then pretty much just do a questionnaire with them to see how they're running their services, what they're gonna do, what type of equipment that they use. Because the same thing out there, when you go to those type of like austere environments, all of these regulations, they still apply. For as long as there's service members there, all of these instructions, they still apply. There will be, and actually things out there, it's going to be more strict out there. So for this barbershop, they didn't have like multiple combs and stuff like that, they was just gonna use the same comb over and over and just clean it. Exactly, that's a no-go. You have to have like different combs that you actually can dispose, and you're gonna use one per patron. And if you don't have that, we're not gonna open this up, not to our people anyway. And then what type of solution are you using to clean it? Is it EPA certified? It was in Arabic, so we had to have a translator come out there and see what all of that was saying. Come to find out, none of that was EPA approved, so, or USDA approved. So then we had to get in touch with Nexcom, which being in Jordan, how long was that gonna take? These Marines were only gonna be in that field for 2 weeks. So I went in and they was like, Doc, we're gonna go open the barbershop, right? And I was like, no, sorry. They didn't like that answer, but I mean, we just wanna make sure that nobody comes back with any type of skin infections. Like, I'm sorry, I just give you the information as it's presented to me, that's all. So then they was like, well, we're gonna open it up anyway. And so I said, okay. And I went to the base commandant and told him like, okay, well, these are the recommendations that I have for you. I'm gonna present it to you in this inspection, and then I'm going to send this memo and I'm gonna send it back to my CO at Camp Lejeune. So that way he knows that if anybody comes back sick in any type of bloodborne pathogen from a barbershop, I'm gonna tell him that I told you not to open this facility. I just need your signature. Or don't, because I'm still sending it anyway. That's how that works.
Listen, sometimes you gotta be like that.
Yeah, I mean, hey, it's like our job here, right, is to keep each other safe, and so that's what I'm trying to do. And if you want to do whatever you want to do and go against what these regulations state, it's not coming from me. Because just as much you don't want me in your face telling you what any of this says, I don't want to have to tell you what it says. So we can just read it together and abide by these rules or not, and then just see what happens. I don't know. Yes. So it gets into some more definitions. The barber is the person that treats and trims the beards and hairs and stuff like that. Depending on the type of facility, sometimes you may have barbers, sometimes not. Just depending on the type of services that they're providing. And then that's gonna tell you the difference between your barber or your beauty shop. Just with the services, because usually the beauty shops and the spas, they offer more treatment, like they do laser treatments and waxing and stuff like that. Most barbershops, they usually don't, at least for our installations, they usually don't. I'm sorry guys, I told you this was just boring and a bunch of words on the screen. So you have in your beauty shops versus your barber shops, you will have more cosmetologists in there, and they focus on like hairstyling and stuff like that. And then you can also have nail technicians in there. The supervisor for any of these facilities is gonna always be listed as the PIC, or person in charge. That's what we like to call it. For most of our facilities, we don't usually have waxing services. And if they do, the most they'll do is like your eyebrows. They're not gonna go anywhere else for all you hairy people out there. I'm just saying. You might wanna go off base for that if you want that kind of treatment, I'm just saying. And so we are, as preventive medicine, we're gonna go out and make sure that everybody is in compliance with the standards, but you also wanna know too that the person in charge, that they really are the ones that should be enforcing all of these standards, like prior to us coming there. Cause it's like the same thing, they will straight up tell you, like, I've been doing this longer than you were born, and I'm like, okay, so that's great, so you know this information, and I shouldn't have to tell you, so police your staff, because that's not what I'm here to do. Alright, and then depending on the type of facility, they give you a breakdown of, the minimum standards of what you're supposed to have for each inspection, and there is a table down here that tells you, depending on the tier of the facility, how often you are going to inspect them, and it's based on a point system. And then down here, it'll tell you the thing.
Frequency.
Yep. 2 times a year, 3 times a year, and this is table 2, tech 2, if anybody wanted to know about this. So any type of facility that offers hair treatment and styling and all of those things, it gets 2 points. But then keep going down the list for the type of facility, because they may have one or more services offered, and then you total up the amount of points, and then you come to the end, and that is your frequency, depending on how many you get. And so for our facilities here, we have majority of them on a semi-annual basis for inspections. I had a guy call me to ask about a certain type of razor that he wanted for his head, and he was arguing with my Sierras about why he couldn't use the type of electric razor or whatever for his head, and I'm like, because it's not like within our standard. And he's like, well, who told you that? My reference here told me that. But also because that type of razor that he wanted to use, it didn't have those removable heads. And again, we talked about you have to have individualized things for your patrons. You're not going to use the same thing over and over again. And because that little razor thing, you can't change out the head,
That's a problem.
we can't do that. This talks about like the facility where they're gonna be placed. So like your barber and beauty shops, they're usually not co-located with your birthing areas. Hot water, yeah.
That must be important.
I was like, I don't know, I feel like I'm going crazy because it's like the same stuff over and over again. And then, what else is good? Some good information from here would be the light intensity for the rooms. It's gonna be at least 50-foot candles. And not anything less than 20 for massage therapy areas.
Oh, okay.
It talks about the light intensity, and we actually have a machine that tells us all of that stuff. We're not in there guessing, like, nothing like that. Moving slowly. So, the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act of 1938, it defines the drugs and their intended use for articles for the diagnosis and treatment of any type of diseases that they may have based on like barber and beauty shops and skin related issues. Again, we talked about those types of antiseptics and cleaning and disinfectant solutions. They have to be EPA approved. And anything that's going to be used on the skin, it has to be FDA approved. that situation we had in Jordan, any type of foreign beauty products that's used for disinfectant, it has to be regulated by the USDA, the FDA, the EPA, or some type of equivalent. And if not, you have to wait until you get notification from NEXCOM or the Marine Corps Exchange to get permission to use that on service members. And this talks about like different disinfectant solutions that are approved and for what purposes. At your barbershops and things of that nature, any like beauty salons and stuff like that, they have to wash their hands in between patients, and it tells you 15 to 20 seconds before and after each person. And it's the same thing with like medical, right? Because there's a difference between washing your hands and just using sanitizer, because after a certain amount of times, you don't want to use sanitizer anymore. You actually have to wash your hands. Then the situation of the guy that called me going crazy about the razors is a fixed or non-disposable blade is not permitted, because we're not trying to pass on any bloodborne pathogens. We talked about this as well, multi-use instruments that are included, not limited to combs, brushes, scissors, and stuff like that.
You retrieve with the EPA solution.
You have to clean them every day. And if you don't clean them, then you need to throw it away and have something like a new one. The use of electric shavers is discouraged because of the inability to clean them properly, in accordance with our standards anyway. One of the disinfectants that they can use to clean surfaces would be chlorine bleach, and they're gonna use that daily. And we actually have these test strips that will tell the concentration of how much you're actually supposed to use in those containers, and you are going to always use the manufacturer's instructions on what your measurement should be.
So this isn't to include like using Clorox wipes or anything like that. Like they have to use like they have to use
Solution.
the solution
Yep.
with like the amount of like water
Yep.
and reference to concentration. Okay.
Any type of disposable items, it can't be retained for use with another patron. Alright, this is a lot. So now we can get into the child facilities and what we look for in here. So when we inspect the CDCs, we want to make sure that our children are being taken care of, right, while we are out here doing what we have to do. The chief of naval installations and the director of the Marine Corps program, they are responsible for the programs overall. Navy Facilities is in charge of the design and construction and things over there. So any type of issues that they have, facilities would take care of that. Naval Facilities, NAVFAC. Preventive medicine personnel, that's me. We are going to do the inspections at a minimum of an annual basis. This is for the Child Development Center itself, so we broke it into 2 different inspections. So we do inspections of the building, and then we do monthly inspections of the kitchen. Because the kitchen is gonna fall into the Tri-Service Food Code. So the P5010 Tech 1 is what the kitchen is gonna be inspected using. And then the facility is gonna get inspected using this reference. In addition to whatever other references that are listed in Appendix A that applies. Trying to see where it's from here. Wow, okay. So this chapter only talks about responsibilities, and then, yeah, that's it with that. Okay. So we have the fitness facilities. I think this is the last section of this, because we already talked about chapter 2. We did, but this one has some more. That was the one that I wanted to open earlier. Anyway, so we have the fitness centers too that we inspect as well. And in there, we're gonna check the equipment, make sure nothing is like broken or any of that. And again, for like any type of damage to the equipment, for example, like if you find a bike seat with like cuts and tears in it, we wanna make sure that we put that on the manager's radar so that they know to get that removed. So then that way it doesn't cause anyone to get any type of injuries or any cuts and open wounds to the skin, because again, those bloodborne pathogens will be passed on that way if you have this ripped, like torn equipment, and you have one person coming in and they just have whatever skin infections they have going on or not, and then get cut on one of those surfaces, then we're gonna have some issues. So again, for these, anything dealing with habitability, sanitation, and things like that, the Chief of Naval Installations, and then the Commandant of the Marine Corps is gonna be responsible for those services, or for the overall facility. And Naval Facilities is gonna be responsible for the design, the planning, and the maintenance. And then Public Works is gonna be in charge of the major repairs and support services. So the trick with all of these is figuring out who is responsible for what. I would just look at certain keywords and then associate that with whoever's in charge. Right, so if we're talking about design and construction, you know, it's NAVFAC. And if it's talking about maintenance, then you're gonna go Public Works. President again is in charge of inspections. And we document them and put them into the doers IH and EH module. And it really shouldn't be separated because it's all in the same. It's just depending on whatever permissions you have or whatever type of inspection that you're putting in, it's either gonna fall into one of the 2 categories, and that's why they're just grouped together. So you'll see doers IH or doers EH, same thing. Because our services overlap.
Does doers OH also like fit into that, or?
No, just for, so I'm not sure of what they do with OH for doors, but EH and IH are always together.
Okay, gotcha.
Your toilet facilities for the gym, they need to be cleaned and disinfected and restocked daily. We come back again with the hot water standard. Same thing straight across,
120.
no greater than 120 degrees. The minimum for the chlorine bleach mixtures for any type of surfaces that you're cleaning, the minimum is 50 parts per million. And again, to mitigate the risk of infection, sanitation is always going to be your primary means of control. So we want to make sure that the equipment is disinfected using potable water and cleaned daily. And then with that solution that we talked about with the chlorine bleach, that's going to be 50 parts per million. You want to prepare that fresh daily as well. Some more temperatures for the sauna and steam rooms. You want to make sure that they do not exceed 200 degrees Fahrenheit. And then the wet saunas, we want to make sure that it's not exceeding that 120 degree mark, right, for the water. And then this last portion says just know that drinks are not allowed. Any type of food or drinks are not allowed in the sauna areas. And anyone who is under the age of 16 needs to be accompanied by an adult.
When you're talking about parts per million with the chlorine, what's the recommended ratio when it comes down to?
Oh, to the water, it's going to be whatever type of disinfectant that you're using. It's going to be on the bottom.
Okay, got it.
Yep. And that is it for this portion. Any questions?